Get out. You don't belong here.
I'm sorry, sir. Ethan invited me.
Ethan invited a
Victor
mistake.
doesn't lower his voice. The
Look
room
at you.
around them goes quiet, one
You
conversation
reek of
at a
somebody
time.
trying to marry her way out of nothing.
I'll leave quietly, sir. I don't want a scene.
Too late for that. People like you don't wander into houses like mine by accident. You smell money and you follow it. Dad, choose, Ethan. Her or this family. Right now, in front of everyone.
I choose her.
Then you're no son of mine.
Minutes later, a black car rolls up the drive. The man who steps out of it is about to bring the whole weight of Victor Sterling's pride crashing down onto his own marble floor.
3 hours earlier, the Sterling estate glows gold against the evening sky. String lights wind through the garden. A 12-piece orchestra plays something quiet near the fountain. 200 guests move through rooms with ceilings high enough to hold their own weather. Champagne towers catching light from 3 separate chandeliers. Victor Sterling stands near the entrance, greeting arrivals the way he's greeted every important person for 40 years. A firm handshake, a practiced laugh. A compliment measured out precisely to the size of the check the guest's family has written to one Sterling cause or another over the years. Tonight belongs to him as much as it belongs to his son. Maybe more. Victor, this is a beautiful evening. A senator's wife touches his arm. Ethan seems so happy. He is. Victor's smile doesn't reach anywhere past his mouth. Once the paperwork's settled, I imagine he'll be even happier. She laughs, not quite sure if it's a joke. Across the room, Ava Bennett stands near the windows in a simple navy gown, no jewelry beyond a thin gold bracelet, watching the party with the quiet attentiveness of someone more comfortable observing a room than being observed by it. Ethan finds her there, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. You look like you're counting exits, he says, smiling. Old habit. She takes the glass. Your father keeps looking at me, like I wandered in from the wrong entrance. He looks at everyone like that at first. Ethan doesn't quite meet her eyes when he says it, which tells her more than the sentence does. Give him time. Across the room, Eleanor Sterling watches the two of them with an expression her husband has learned, over 31 years of marriage, to mostly ignore. She's always been the one who notices things before Victor does. Which employee is quietly excellent? Which guest is performing wealth rather than possessing it? Which one of her son's girlfriends over the years actually deserved him? Tonight, watching Ava stand perfectly still while Victor circles closer, Eleanor feels something tighten low in her chest, the specific dread of watching a mistake arrive before anyone else in the room can see its shape yet. Near the bar, Charles Monroe, chairman of Sterling Holdings Board, leans toward Sophia Reynolds, a business journalist, covering the gala for a lifestyle piece that was supposed to be entirely uncomplicated. Have you met her? The fiancée? Briefly, Sophia glances toward Ava. She's remarkably composed for someone marrying into this family. She'll need to be. Charles doesn't elaborate. He doesn't need to. Everyone at this level of the room understands exactly what he means. Sophia watches Ava a moment longer than the conversation requires, pen still in her bag, nothing written down yet. She's covered enough of these families to recognize the particular quiet some people carry, the kind that isn't shyness, isn't nerves, but something closer to a person who has learned, a long time ago, not to lead with everything they are. Victor makes his way across the floor, an hour into the party, champagne in hand, the particular walk of a man who has decided something and is simply choosing the moment to announce it. He stops in front of Ava directly, Ethan a step behind, and looks her over the way he's looked over exactly 3 other women his son has brought home. Quickly, thoroughly, and with a conclusion already reached before the assessment finishes. So you're the one, he says. Ava Bennett. She extends her hand. It's lovely to finally meet you, Mr. Sterling. He doesn't take it. Where's your family from? Originally, or now? Either. His tone makes clear he already suspects the answer won't satisfy him. We've moved around, Ava says simply. My father's work took us to a lot of places. And what does your father do? He's in business. Victor's smile thins. Vague answer. It's not meant to be evasive, Mr. Sterling, just accurate. Something in Victor's expression shifts. Not curiosity, but confirmation of a suspicion he came into this conversation already carrying. He glances at her gown, unremarkable by the standards of this room, no visible jewelry worth naming, and files the information exactly where he'd already decided it belonged, before she said a single word. "I've built this family's name for 40 years, he says, quieter now, but not quiet enough that Eleanor, 3 feet away, doesn't hear every word. I don't intend to hand it to someone who married her way into it. I haven't asked you to hand me anything, Mr. Sterling. Not yet." The music continues. The party continues around them, oblivious for now, to the exact shape of what's about to happen in the middle of it. The shape that will end, in less than 20 minutes, with 200 guests going quiet all at once, and a black car turning onto the private drive outside, carrying a man none of them have met yet, about to prove exactly how wrong Victor Sterling has been. Outside, the cool air hits Ava first. Ethan catches up to her near the fountain, his jacket already half off his shoulders before she can tell him not to bother. "I'm fine," she says. "Really? You're not fine. I just watched my father." He stops, jaw tight, and hands her the jacket anyway. "I should have said something sooner," the moment he started. "You said something when it mattered." Ava takes the jacket, more for him than for herself. "You chose. That shouldn't have been a choice." Ethan's voice is quieter now, the anger giving way to something closer to shame. A father shouldn't make his son choose between the woman he loves and a house. Some fathers think that's exactly their job. They stand there a moment, the sound of the party still drifting faintly from the ballroom behind them, neither one of them in any hurry to go back inside. "Ava," Ethan takes her hand. "Whatever happens with him, I need you to know it doesn't change anything on my end." "I know." She almost smiles. "I've never once doubted that part." Back inside, Victor has already turned the moment into a story he can survive. He stands near the fireplace, champagne refreshed, addressing the small cluster of guests still close enough to have heard everything. "I won't apologize for protecting this family," he says, loud enough to carry. 40 years I've built this name. I'm not going to watch my son hand half of it to a woman nobody in this room has ever heard of." "Victor." Eleanor's voice is low, careful, the tone of a wife who has learned exactly how far she can push in public. "That's enough." It's not enough until he understands what he's giving up. A guest near the bar leans toward another, voice pitched just low enough to pretend it's private. "Did you see her face? Not even upset, like she expected it. Please." She probably knew this was coming the moment she decided to chase a Sterling. The second guest sips her champagne. Some women plan for exactly this outcome. Or maybe she just didn't care to explain herself to people who'd already decided the answer before asking the question. A third voice cuts in. An older woman near the window. Someone none of them recognize immediately, who doesn't wait for a response before drifting toward the terrace. Charles Monroe, standing a few feet away, doesn't join the conversation, but he doesn't look convinced by it either. He'd noticed something in the 30 seconds he watched Ava before Victor's outburst, the stillness of someone who wasn't performing composure, but simply already possessed it. That kind of quiet doesn't usually belong to people who are frightened of losing something. Sophia Reynolds has her phone out now, not recording, just noting the time. She's covered enough scandals dressed up as galas to recognize the shape of a story before it fully arrives. She doesn't yet know what this one is. She knows it's coming. "She said her father's in business," Sophia says quietly to Charles. That's all she gave him. Vague. Or private. Sophia watches the door. There's a difference, and I don't think Victor knows which one he's dealing with, or that the difference is about to matter a great deal more than he expects. 20 minutes pass. The orchestra plays on, though fewer people are dancing now, the air in the room thinner than it was an hour ago. Victor holds court by the fireplace, repeating variations of the same justification to anyone still willing to listen, each version slightly more certain than the last, as though saying it enough times will make it retroactively true. That's when the front doors open. Not violently, not dramatically, Just a set of tall double doors swinging open under the hand of a member of staff who looks, for a brief moment, unusually careful about how he does it. The particular deference reserved for guests who don't need to announce themselves. A black town car sits in the circular drive beyond him, engine still running, driver already stepping around to open the rear door before the man inside has to ask. He steps out unhurried. Dark suit, no watch worth naming. The kind of quiet presence that doesn't demand a room's attention so much as simply receive it without asking. He pauses at the threshold for a moment, taking in the chandeliers, the champagne towers, the 200 faces that haven't yet turned toward him. "Good evening," he says to the staff member at the door, voice calm, unremarkable on its surface. "I believe my daughter was here tonight." The staff member's expression flickers, recognition arriving somewhere behind his eyes, though he doesn't yet say the name out loud. "Sir, may I ask who's—" "Benjamin Bennett," he says it simply, the way a man says something he's said 10,000 times before, and has never once needed to raise his voice to make it land. "I'm looking for Ava." Behind him, near the fireplace, Victor is mid-sentence, still explaining himself to a room that slowly stopped listening. He has no idea the front doors just opened. He has no idea what just walked through them. The name moves through the ballroom the way certain names do, not shouted, not announced, just passed from one person to the next in a lowering register of disbelief. "Bennett," someone repeats near the bar. "Did he say Bennett?" Charles Monroe hears it first from across the room, and something in his chest goes cold before his mind has even finished the thought. He sets his glass down on the nearest surface without looking at it. "Sophia." His voice is tight. "Tell me that's not who I think it is." Sophia is already walking toward the entrance, phone forgotten in her hand. "Benjamin Bennett doesn't attend galas, Charles. He doesn't attend anything. I've tried for 3 years to get 5 minutes with him for a profile. His office doesn't even confirm he received the request. Then why is he standing in Victor's foyer? Neither of them has an answer yet. But the room is beginning to supply one on its own. Guest by guest, the recognition spreading the way cold water spreads through a warm room. Not all at once, but inevitably, reaching every corner eventually. An older gentleman near the fireplace, a hedge fund founder who has sat across boardroom tables from half the men in this room, goes visibly pale. "That's Bennett Global," he mutters to his wife. "That's the man who restructured half the infrastructure debt in West Africa. That's—" He stops himself, as if saying more might make it too real. "Ava's father," his wife finishes for him, understanding arriving in her voice before it arrives anywhere else. Ava Bennett. Bennett Global. Oh my God. Near the terrace doors, the two guests who'd whispered about Ava chasing a sterling 20 minutes earlier now stand frozen, champagne glasses forgotten in their hands, the color draining from one face and then the other. Eleanor Sterling feels it before she understands it. A shift in the room's temperature, the particular silence that only happens when 200 wealthy, powerful people all simultaneously realize they've misjudged the size of a room. She turns toward the entrance and sees him, unhurried, composed, exactly the kind of quiet her instincts had already recognized in his daughter an hour ago, before any of this made sense. "Victor." Eleanor's hand finds her husband's arm. "Victor, look." Victor turns, mid-sentence, mid-justification, and for the first time all evening, the words simply stop in his mouth. He doesn't recognize the face immediately. That's the strange part. A man of Victor's stature prides himself on recognizing every important face in any room he enters, and yet this one arrives entirely unfamiliar to him, which somehow makes the reaction rippling through his own guests all the more unsettling. If this man mattered enough to silence 200 people without saying more than 6 words, Victor should already know exactly who he is. He doesn't. Who, Victor says slowly, to no one in particular, is that? Charles reaches him first, voice low, urgent. "Victor, that's Benjamin Bennett. I don't know that name." "You should." Charles's jaw is tight. Bennett Global. 40 billion in infrastructure and renewable energy assets across 3 continents. He sat on the UN Economic Advisory Panel for a decade. He's funded more hospitals and universities than half the philanthropists in this city combined, and none of them carry his name on the building, because he's never once asked for one to. Victor's expression doesn't change yet. Not because he doesn't understand, but because some part of him is still working to reconcile the man standing at his door with anything he'd assumed about the woman he just had removed from his party. That's not possible, Victor says. She said her father was in business. He is in business, Victor. He's just not in the business of telling people what kind. Across the room, Sophia has reached the entrance, close enough now to hear Benjamin's voice directly. Mr. Bennett. She extends a hand, professional instinct overriding everything else. Sophia Reynolds, I cover. I know who you cover for, Ms. Reynolds. Benjamin's tone isn't unkind, just precise. Not tonight. Tonight I'm only here for my daughter. Of course. Sophia lowers her hand. She left about 20 minutes ago. With Ethan. Something in Benjamin's expression shifts. Not surprise, exactly. More like a father confirming a fact he'd already suspected before he asked. Did she leave on her own terms? Sophia hesitates. Not exactly, sir. Benjamin nods once, slowly, and something in that single motion carries more weight than anything shouted in the room all evening. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't ask for an explanation. He simply turns his attention, for the first time, toward the man standing frozen by the fireplace. The man who built this house, this name, this legacy, he spent 40 years protecting from exactly the kind of person he never realized he was insulting. Mr. Sterling. Benjamin's voice carries easily across the sudden quiet of the room. Not loud, simply unignorable. I understand my daughter was a guest here tonight. Victor's mouth opens. Nothing useful comes out of it. I also understand, Benjamin continues, unhurried, that she isn't a guest here any longer. The silence stretches. 200 people who came tonight to celebrate an engagement now stand motionless, waiting to see exactly how badly the man who built this house is about to discover he's misjudged the floor he's standing on. Victor finally finds something resembling his voice. Mr. Bennett, there's clearly been some confusion tonight, and I'd like the chance to— There's no confusion, Mr. Sterling. Benjamin's tone doesn't rise. It doesn't need to. I heard exactly what happened before I walked through that door. What I'd like to understand now is simpler than an explanation. He pauses, letting the question sit in the room the way only a man who has never needed to rush ever lets a question sit. Was it her appearance that told you she didn't belong here? Benjamin asks. Or was it something else you haven't said out loud yet? Nobody in that ballroom moves. Nobody breathes particularly loudly. Victor Sterling, who has spent 40 years building a name nobody dared question, stands in the middle of his own home with no answer prepared for the one question that actually matters. Charles pulls Victor aside before he can attempt an answer, gripping his arm harder than protocol usually allows between a board chairman and his CEO. Victor, a word now. They step into the study off the main hall, door closing on the frozen silence of the ballroom behind them. Charles doesn't wait for Victor to sit down. Do you have any idea what you just did? I defended my family's name. You insulted the one man whose signature was supposed to save this company. Charles's voice is low, urgent, stripped of the careful diplomacy he usually reserves for Victor. Bennett Global has been in exploratory talks with our infrastructure division for 4 months. Quiet talks, the kind we don't put in press releases because if they fall through, our stock takes a hit we can't afford to explain. Victor's face goes pale in a way Charles has never seen in 11 years of working alongside him. That deal isn't final. It's preliminary. It was preliminary until an hour ago. Bennett's team was scheduled to present final terms to our board next week. $800 million, Victor. A joint venture that would have carried this company for the next decade. Charles lets that number sit in the air. And you just called his daughter trash in front of 200 witnesses, several of whom are already texting reporters. Victor sinks into the chair behind his desk, the same desk where he's closed 100 deals over the years, suddenly feeling considerably smaller behind it than he did an hour ago. I didn't know, he says, quieter now. How was I supposed to know? You weren't supposed to guess, Victor. You were supposed to treat her like a human being, regardless of what you assumed she had or didn't have. Charles's jaw tightens. That's the part nobody in this family seems to understand yet. It was never about whether she happened to be wealthy. It was about how you decided to treat her before you knew. The board will want answers by Monday, Victor says, almost to himself. If this reaches the press before we've controlled the framing. There is no framing, Victor. Charles's voice sharpens. There's a recording. Multiple recordings probably by now. You don't get to write the story this time. Other people already have. Victor stares at his own hands on the desk, as though they might offer an explanation his mouth can't find. The door opens. Ethan steps in. Eleanor a step behind him. Both faces carrying versions of the same expression. Ethan's furious. Eleanor's simply exhausted, in a way that looks older than her 60 years. Dad! Ethan's voice is steady, controlled. The calm of a man who has finally stopped waiting for his father to arrive at decency on his own. Do you understand what you've done tonight? Not to the company, to Ava. I understand there's a business consequence I need to manage. That's not what I asked. Ethan's voice doesn't rise, but something in it cuts sharper than shouting would. I asked if you understand what you did to a person, not a deal. A person you humiliated in front of 200 guests because you decided, without a single piece of evidence, that she wasn't good enough for this family. Victor doesn't answer right away. Eleanor sits down slowly across from him, and when she finally speaks, her voice carries 31 years of a wife choosing her battles carefully, spent all at once. I tried to tell you, Victor. The moment I met her, I told you there was something in that girl worth paying attention to. You didn't listen because you'd already decided what you were looking at, before she said a word. Eleanor, I'm not finished. She doesn't raise her voice either, but something in her tone leaves no room for interruption. You've spent 40 years telling this family that character matters more than money. Tonight you proved you've never actually believed that. You believed money reveals character. That's not the same thing, and it's not what you taught our son, whether you meant to or not. Outside the study, the ballroom empties faster than any of them planned for. Guests find reasons to leave early, murmuring apologies to staff, several already composing the story they'll tell at brunch tomorrow. Sophia Reynolds lingers by the door longer than anyone, phone finally out, fingers moving across the screen, not publishing yet, but writing something down for the first time all night, the shape of a story finally clear enough to hold. Charles's phone buzzes. He glances at it, exhales sharply. Our head of communications wants to know if we should issue a statement before this reaches social media. He looks up at Victor. There are already 3 phones worth of footage from that exchange. This isn't containable, Victor. Not the way you're used to containing things. Then what do you suggest? I suggest, Charles says slowly, that the first call you make isn't to a lawyer or a publicist. It's to the woman you had removed from this house an hour ago. Victor's hands are steady on the desk in front of him, but something underneath them isn't. 40 years of certainty. Certainty about what belongs in this house. Certainty about what money and blood are supposed to protect. Collapsing faster than he has language ready to explain, even to himself. She won't take my call, Victor says quietly. No, Ethan agrees. She probably won't. Not yet. Then what am I supposed to do? Nobody in the room answers right away. Eleanor looks at her husband the way she might look at a stranger. Not with hatred, but with the particular grief of 31 years spent believing a man understood something he apparently never did. Finally, Ethan speaks. Quiet. Final. You start by understanding you can't buy your way out of this one, Dad. For the first time in your life, there's no number that fixes what you did. Victor says nothing. Outside the study window, the last of the guests' cars pull away down the long drive, tail lights disappearing into the dark, leaving behind a house that suddenly feels far too large for the 4 people still standing inside it. 3 days pass before Ava agrees to see him. Victor spends those 3 days learning things he should have known before he ever opened his mouth in that ballroom. Bennett Global, $40 billion in assets. A foundation that's quietly funded clean water systems across 9 countries, none of it carrying the Bennett name on a single plaque. A daughter who left a private equity career at 26 to run the foundation full-time, working out of a modest office 2 floors above a public library, because Benjamin insisted overhead spending should never come before the mission. He also learns, from an old contact who used to sit on a nonprofit board with Benjamin, something that unsettles him more than the balance sheet does. Benjamin Bennett has walked away from 3 separate business partnerships over the years, each one worth considerably more than the deal Sterling Holdings had on the table, the moment he discovered how a potential partner treated the people beneath them. Not the wealthy, the staff, the assistants, the people with nothing to offer in return. None of it changes what Victor did. He understands that now, in a way he didn't 3 days ago. The meeting takes place at the Bennett family's townhouse, smaller than Victor expected, understated, in a way that unsettles him more than opulence would have. Ava opens the door herself. No staff announcing him. No procession through marble halls designed to remind a guest of his place. Mr. Sterling. Her voice is even, neither warm nor cold. Come in. The sitting room is simple. Comfortable furniture. Books that look read rather than displayed. A single photograph on the mantel of a much younger Ava standing beside her father in front of a half-built well, somewhere that isn't America. Benjamin sits in a chair near the window, saying nothing, watching Victor the way a man watches weather he's already decided he can wait out. Victor sits across from Ava. He'd rehearsed something on the drive over. It doesn't survive contact with her face. I came to apologize, he says. Properly, not the version I gave in front of my board, or the version my publicist wants me to give in front of a camera. Just properly, to you. All right. Ava folds her hands in her lap. I'm listening. I looked at you and saw someone I'd already decided didn't belong in my family. Before you said a word, I told myself it was about protecting a legacy, but that's not honest, is it? I looked at your appearance, made an assumption about where you came from, and treated you like you had to prove something to me that I've never once demanded from anyone else who walked through my door. No, Ava says quietly. You haven't. Victor absorbs that without flinching, though it costs him something visible to do it. I humiliated you in front of 200 people. I called security. I made my own son choose between his family and the woman he loves, because I couldn't imagine you were anything other than what I'd already decided you were. You didn't just insult me, Mr. Sterling. Ava's voice stays even, but something underneath it finally surfaces. You did it in front of people who will remember exactly how easily you did it. Ethan's friends, your board members, people who will now wonder, every time they see someone who looks like me walk into a room, whether that person had to prove something too. I know. Do you? She holds his gaze. Because there's a version of this apology, Mr. Sterling, where you're only sorry because of who my father turned out to be, where the humiliation was fine, right up until it became expensive. Victor doesn't answer immediately. That's the accusation he's been most afraid of since the moment Charles told him about the joint venture, and hearing it spoken aloud, calmly, without malice, lands harder than any accusation delivered in anger could have. I've asked myself that same question every hour for 3 days, he says finally. I don't have a clean answer for you. I'd like to say I would have apologized regardless of who your father is. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I'm the kind of man who arrives at decency without a consequence forcing me there. Something shifts slightly in Ava's expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the smallest acknowledgement of an honest answer where she'd expected a rehearsed one. Benjamin, by the window, still hasn't spoken. He watches his daughter with the quiet attention of a man who trusts her completely to handle this without his help, though everyone in the room understands his presence is doing something on its own, a reminder, unspoken, of exactly how much larger the consequences could have been if he'd chosen to make them so. Ethan told me you'd change, Ava says. That underneath everything, you actually believe in something better than what you showed that night. I want to believe that's true. Wanting to and being able to aren't the same thing, Mr. Sterling. Victor nods slowly. There's nothing in that sentence he can argue with. Ava is quiet for a long moment, looking at him. Not with hatred, not with triumph, just the careful, searching look of someone trying to determine whether a person is capable of the thing they're claiming to want to become. "I need to ask you something," she says finally, "and I need you to actually think about it before you answer." Victor waits. "My father didn't walk through that door because I asked him to," Ava says. "He didn't know what happened until he was already on his way. If he'd been traveling that night, if he'd simply never come, and the truth about my family had never reached that ballroom at all." She pauses, and for the first time since he arrived, her composure cracks just slightly, just enough to let the real question through. "Would anything have changed, Mr. Sterling? Or would I simply still be the woman you decided didn't belong in your family, and you'd have never once questioned whether that decision was wrong?" The room goes silent. Benjamin by the window doesn't move. Victor opens his mouth to answer, and finds, for the second time in 3 days, that he doesn't have one ready. Victor doesn't answer Ava's question that day. He leaves the townhouse in silence, and for a week, nobody in the family hears much from him at all. What he does instead is quieter than any answer would have been. He calls an emergency session of Sterling Holdings board, not to discuss the collapsed joint venture, but to propose something none of them expected: an independent review of hiring and promotion practices across every division, conducted by an outside firm with no ties to the company. Mandatory bias training for every executive, starting with himself, a permanent seat on the board reserved for someone with no personal or financial connection to the Sterling family, whose sole mandate is flagging culture concerns directly to shareholders. "You're doing this because of the deal," one board member says bluntly. "Because you think it'll bring Bennett back to the table." "I'm doing it because I have to live with what I did," Victor answers, and for once, nobody in the room doubts him, because the man in front of them looks nothing like the one who stood by his fireplace 3 weeks ago, insisting he had nothing to apologize for. The review takes 6 weeks. The findings aren't flattering. A promotion gap in the executive ranks that Victor had never once bothered to examine. Hiring patterns in 3 divisions that mirror exactly the assumption he made about Ava the moment he saw her. He doesn't bury the report. He presents it to the full company himself. In an all-hands meeting, he insists on running personally, rather than delegating to communications. Sophia Reynolds covers the meeting, and this time she doesn't need to chase the story. Victor's team sends her the full report unedited, along with an offer to answer any question she asks, on the record, without a publicist filtering the response first. It's the first time in her career covering the Sterlings that anyone from that family has done that. "This is what we've been," he tells 400 employees, standing without notes, for the first time in a career built almost entirely on rehearsed remarks. "I won't pretend the timing of this review isn't connected to my own failure. It is. But the failure was real, regardless of when I finally saw it, and so is the responsibility to fix it. At home, the repair moves slower and costs more." Eleanor watches him from a careful distance for weeks, neither forgiving nor condemning, simply observing whether the change survives contact with an ordinary Tuesday once the cameras and board members aren't in the room. It's a small thing that finally convinces her. She finds him one evening reviewing promotion files at the kitchen table, alone, no assistant, no audience, checking the review committee's work against his own memory of every executive he's ever passed over without asking why. "You didn't have to do that yourself," she says. "I know." He doesn't look up. "I wanted to understand exactly how it happened, not the version other people summarize for me." Ethan comes around slower still. He'd meant what he said in the study, that there was no number that fixed what his father did. And for weeks, he holds to that, keeping his distance, letting Victor's actions speak without offering forgiveness in advance of them. It's a phone call from Ava, 3 weeks into the company reforms, that finally shifts something in him. "He asked to sit in on one of my foundation's grant reviews," she tells Ethan, "not to write a check, just to watch how we decide who gets funded and why." He didn't say much. He mostly just listened. That doesn't undo what he did. "No," Ava agrees. "But it's not supposed to undo anything, Ethan. It's supposed to be what he does next. Those are different things, and I think your father is finally starting to understand the difference." Benjamin, for his part, says almost nothing about any of it. Not to Victor, not to Ava, not even to Ethan, who asks him directly, over dinner one evening, whether he thinks Victor's changed. I think, Benjamin says slowly, that 6 weeks isn't very long to judge a man's character. I also think a man who spends 6 weeks doing hard, unglamorous work nobody's forcing him to do anymore is telling you something true about himself, whether or not it's the whole truth yet. It's Eleanor who finally raises the subject none of them have spoken aloud since the night of the gala. Ava and Ethan should set a date. She tells Victor one evening, setting a stack of mail on the table between them. They've waited long enough because of us. Victor is quiet for a moment. Do you think she'd want me there? After everything? I think, Eleanor says, that's a question you should ask her yourself, instead of asking me to answer it for you. He does ask her, 2 days later, in a phone call that lasts 11 minutes and ends with Ava saying yes. Not warmly, not yet, but honestly, which by now is the only currency Victor has learned actually matters. By the following week, invitations go out to 200 guests, addressed in Eleanor's careful handwriting, each envelope carrying a date neither family thought they'd reach 3 months ago. The wedding takes place on a clear October afternoon, in a garden considerably smaller than the one where all of this began, chosen deliberately by Ava and Ethan over anything the Sterling estate could offer. Benjamin walks his daughter down the aisle himself. No fanfare, no announcement of his presence required this time, because everyone here already knows exactly who he is, and has, by now, stopped needing that knowledge to determine how they treat her. Ava wears a simple ivory dress, minimal jewelry, the same quiet confidence she carried into a ballroom 4 months ago, where a man once decided, in under a minute, that she didn't belong. Victor stands near the front with Eleanor, and when Ava reaches him, a small detour built into the ceremony at her own request, something neither Ethan nor Eleanor knew was planned. He doesn't know quite what to do with his hands. Mr. Sterling, Ava says quietly, pausing beside him before continuing toward the altar. Ava, his voice catches slightly on her name, still unused to saying it without the weight of everything it used to carry between them. I'm grateful you let me be here today. I didn't let you, Ava says, not unkindly. Ethan wanted you here. Eleanor wanted you here. And I decided, somewhere over the last 4 months, that a man who does the work quietly, without an audience demanding he keep doing it, has earned the chance to stand in a room and watch his son marry someone he once tried to have removed from it. Victor's eyes are wet, and he doesn't bother hiding it, which is itself a kind of change nobody watching would have predicted from him a year ago. For what it's worth, he says, I never got to answer your question properly, about whether anything would have changed if your father had never walked through that door. You don't need to answer it today. I'd like to try. Victor's voice is steady now. I don't know if I would have arrived here on my own. Ava, I want to believe I would have. But I think the honest answer is that your father's arrival didn't create my change. It only exposed how badly I needed one. What I did afterward, that part was mine. Nobody made me do the work. I could have stopped the moment the deal came back to the table. I didn't. Ava studies him for a long moment. The same searching look she gave him in her father's sitting room 4 months ago. No, she says finally. You didn't. She continues down the aisle. Victor watches her go, and for the first time since the night of the gala, something in his chest finally settles into something that isn't quite peace, but is close enough to recognize its shape. The ceremony itself is brief, warm, entirely unremarkable in the way the best ones usually are. 2 people who chose each other before either family had settled its business with the other, finally getting to stand still long enough to make it official. Sophia Reynolds attends as a guest this time, not a reporter, though she'll write about it anyway, months later, in a piece that has nothing to do with scandal, and everything to do with what happens after one, if a family is willing to do the harder, slower work of actually changing. At the reception, Charles Monroe finds Benjamin near the edge of the garden, both men watching the newlyweds share their first dance. For what it's worth, Charles says, the joint venture is back on the table. Bennett Global's team reached out to us last week. I know, Benjamin says. I approved it. May I ask why? After everything? Benjamin considers the question for a moment before answering. Because the company that presented those revised terms wasn't the same company I walked away from 4 months ago. People can change, Mr. Monroe. Rarely quickly, and never because they're told to. But they can, if the change costs them something real, and if they keep choosing it after nobody's watching anymore.